Good morning and welcome to day 12 of our No Complaining Challenge. And if you're joining us brand new on this challenge, it's just about no complaining. Very simple. And so today is a Sunday, July 12th, 2026. So today is a day of rest for most people who are Christians. And in the spirit of celebrating rest, I would like for you to follow me on this journey and close your eyes just for a moment, okay? Unless you're driving. And just picture this Sunday afternoon. Everywhere is quiet. Nobody's asking you for anything. Or it could be Monday afternoon, whatever day that you have as a day of rest. You're resting, at least from the outside. But yet, you're replaying conversations in your mind from Thursday, the one where you should have said something different, you should have done something different. You're rehearsing the arguments with someone who isn't even in the room, who doesn't even know that you're upset or irritated or hurt. So your body stopped moving, but your mind never stopped. And the question I want to ask you is, if your body is still, but inside you're still complaining, are you actually resting? Or are you just complaining quietly with a better posture, so to say? And that's what we're focused on today, is this attitude and the posture of true rest. And if you've made it here to this day 12, you've already outlasted the willpower spike. And now is something deeper. You've been observing. You notice things about yourself that you didn't notice on day one. And we've talked about the difference between naming a problem and being consumed by it. We've talked about grumbling. But today, it's not about what comes out of your mouth or what's happening underneath. It's about resting. Most of your complaining doesn't start with your mouth, and we know that. It starts with your inability to rest. And it's resting your mind, keeping your mind at peace. So we'll come back to that. But I want to talk about the difference between stopping and resting. Because we stop working. Sunday is a day where we stop working, but we never actually rest. Yeah, our bodies slow down, but does your mind slow down? And I want to spend some time thinking about this because I think it's one of the most quietly destructive patterns in the life of any business person, entrepreneur, especially in the West. Anyone who's building anything and who carries responsibility for others. It could be a family, it could be a team, a ministry. And there's a difference between stopping and resting. When you stop, all you're doing is you're putting an end or a temporary pause to the activity. Just like when you got a car with an empty tank, it stopped. But that doesn't mean it's been refueled. It just means it ran out. And sometimes we're running on empty and we're not refueling. We live a life refueled by nothing. We stop because we're tired, not because we've gone into rest. And some of us collapse. We break down. And that's not rest. Okay? And I think there's some hidden lies or counterfeits. Let me call them counterfeits that we call rest. There are things that they masquerade, they pretend, they cover up what's really going on, but it's not rest. It's almost complaining in disguise. I'll give you some examples, and these are from my life, things that I've observed. On Sunday, it may be time to rest, but instead of actually resting your mind, you're busy scrolling, binging, something to distract your mind. You didn't process the day, you just paused it or muted it. And like I said earlier, some of us were thinking about everything that happened the week before, the mistake, the insult, the conversation. Thinking about how we're going to come back from that conversation, the argument. It's already over. That's not reflection. That's the courtroom running in your mind. And you're the prosecutor and the victim. That's the way this voice works. It takes both sides. You'll be having an argument in your head and taking different positions. If that was a human, a real person, you would not want to be near them. But you have this going on in your head. Or we look in the future. We worry about tomorrow and we call it planning. And we know there's a difference between prayerful preparation and anxiousness. One of them is always going to end in peace. And the other, it makes you anxious. Sunday, sometimes in the past, I would be anxious about Monday because I knew what was ahead of me. I didn't want to deal with it. Sometimes we mentally try to manage the outcomes that we have zero, no power at all to influence or affect. Hoping the report comes back a certain way. Now, here's what all of these things have in common. It all is about us refusing to give God something that only God can control. And that refusal, that's the real subject. That's the real thing that I want to talk about today. Not whether you took a nap, whether you closed your eyes and relaxed, but whether you really trusted. And without realizing it, we're still complaining, just silently. I'd even go a step further. I'd say silent complaining might be more dangerous than loud complaining, because loud complaining, at least it's easier to detect. You know you're doing it. But silent complaining, it's like that little cockroach that hides. And sometimes it looks like you can be justified. It looks like you're resting on a Sunday afternoon, but there's war going on inside. Let's go back to Genesis, because I don't think we take it seriously enough as far as what it means that rest, it shows up in the actual blueprint of the design, in the architecture of creation. It's one of the first thing, well, it was the last thing. And in Genesis 2, verse 2, it says, on the seventh day, God finished the work that he had done, and he rested from all the work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it, God rested from all his work that he had done. Now think about that for a second. God does not get tired. I don't believe that's what this is saying. So this rest is not about recovery. It's not like he clocked out because, he was tired. I think it's a demonstration. It's a pattern of image bearers like us. It's a pattern that rest is necessary. Rest was built into creation. It's not a repair for a hurt or a broken system. It's a design feature. And it's so easy to miss that rest is part of the commandments, and it sits in the same list as murder and stealing. We treat rest like, okay, it's just a suggestion, but it's been categorized as almost law. And I think that should make us think a little bit harder. Failing to rest is not just poor self-care. It's treated with the same seriousness as other violations. And the first lesson one of the lessons that I remember, or that I can think of, was the lesson of manna. God feeds the Israel people bread, every single morning. But the rule is only take what's good for that day. Don't hoard it. Don't stockpile it. Don't worry about tomorrow's provision. And guess what? Some people didn't listen. They kept extra. And the ones that they kept extra, it got spoiled. And that's not a random detail. I think it's a spiritual diagnosis that we need to pay attention to. When we try to hoard provision out of fear instead of trust, it spoils. Anxiety doesn't preserve anything. It just decays. But then on that sixth day, God told them to double up, essentially. Because the seventh is a Sabbath and no manna was going to come on that seventh. And on that seventh, that was the only time in the story the leftover bread didn't go bad. It was fine. So it looks like God is teaching the entire nation about trust. Rest is not about the absence of provision. It's about trusting the provision that you can't see. That's the one day that you don't have to be worried about work, worried about what am I going to do tomorrow. The same God who fed you, provided yesterday, did all those things, is here today. And that's what Sabbath is, essentially. It's not about being lazy. It's about believing God enough to stop and to rest. And so rest is just a rehearsal of trust, and we get to do it every week. So if you messed up last week, today is a perfect day to restore and to practice your rest. Every Sabbath was an opportunity for the Israelites to practice their rest. And it's saying, the world does not depend on me. So God is still in complete sovereignty, even when you stop. And rest isn't just something you do after you trust God. Rest is one of the ways that you practice trusting God. It's active. It's a weekly act of defiance against the lie that everything depends on you. I used to be that guy. Everything depends on me. Everything has to work. If I don't do it, it's not going to work. And that's the bridge to complaining, because I don't want this to stay theoretical. If rest is trust in action, then what is complaining? Complaining is anxiety in action. It's the same muscle used in the opposite direction. And complaining confesses. It confesses something internal. It's not always about the traffic or the client or the coworker. Every complaint is almost like a sermon that you're preaching to yourself about who's actually in charge. Let me explain that to you. So when you complain, something like, man, that I'll use the waiter. I used that waiter in the last example, that the waiter wasn't bringing the food fast enough. That's not complaint. That's not a complaint about timing. That's a confession that I believe that my timeline is more trustworthy than God's timeline. Because who knows what God was preventing by delaying me there for 2 more minutes. I could have left, got my food early, and been delayed. Went out early. So every time we complain, it's confessing that we don't trust. And none of us would ever say any of these complaints in a prayer. You never kneel down and pray, God, I don't trust you to handle this, so I'm going to do it myself. But that's exactly what complaining is saying. Just dressed up as venting, like we talked about yesterday, or being realistic, or just processing. But trust says something completely different. Trust says, I've done what I can do. Now I release what I cannot do. And that's the most active form of faith, is when you release. Because it requires that you got to actually believe God is who God says he is, instead of just saying you believe. So here's a simple test that we can run. When you catch yourself complaining, what am I actually confessing right now about who's in control? If your complaint is really a confession of unbelief, then the solution isn't going to be to try harder not to talk about it, or like one of our members said, to just use willpower. It's worship. It's remembering out loud who God has been to you. And that's why gratitude keeps allowing you to overcome. Gratitude is the weapon for every complaint. Jesus says, "Come to me, all who are heavy, and I will give you rest." And I used to not really understand what this meant. And Jesus doesn't say, "Come to me and I'll fix your problems." He says, "I'll give you rest." Not, "I'll answer your questions," or, "I'll explain why this is happening." Before the explanation, before it's rest. And it tells us something about how Jesus operates that we tend to get backwards. We think Jesus gives answers, then peace. Understand first, and then you can rest. But Jesus offers peace as a gift you receive before understanding. And sometimes you might not even ever understand the situation. And some of us are waiting for an explanation about why they did this, why they did that, before you allow yourself to rest. Once I understand why this happened, then I'll be able to move on. No. Once this deal closes, once the diagnosis, Jesus is saying that's backwards. Come as you are, still with the problem, still confused, still mid-crisis, still midlife, and just rest. The rest is not the reward for figuring it out. Rest is the gift that helps you walk, that helps you go through it without necessarily having to figure it out. And the invitation is not for the lazy people. Look at it. It says that those who labor and are heavy laden. The invitation is for those who are productive. Not people who avoid responsibility. It's for people who are working diligently and still carrying too much, and which is most of us. It's probably you listening. You got, putting in 80 hours a week. You got kids, all this stuff. And if you're listening, you're probably not someone who needs to be told to work harder. You're probably a hardworking person. I know I was, and I am to a certain extent. You're probably somebody who just needs to be told it's okay to stop holding on and doing too much. You're an overachiever. You're a provider. You're a fixer. The one who feels responsible for everybody else. That's who this verse is for. And sometimes the miracle is you. You are the miracle. Sometimes the greatest miracle is not that, things have changed, but that our hearts have accepted the peace that comes from knowing God. We define answered prayers as our answer. The job comes through. But there's a quieter miracle sometimes, and that's the peace that comes even when the situation doesn't work out or look like it doesn't. If you only believe God was working on your behalf right now in this season, what would you still be thinking about? If you truly believe, just think about it. If you knew, not believe, if you knew that God was working on your behalf, would you still be having that conversation in your head about this person that didn't agree? Would you still be carrying that resentment towards somebody who hurt you? Would you still be obsessing over tomorrow or complaining? And let's get personal, because I think it hits different when it's not abstract. I run a business where the work never technically finishes. There's always something to do, and it's been like that for years for me. And for a long time, my version of rest, it looked exactly like what we described in this previous few minutes. I would be at home, but my mind would be on my work. I'd be counting down till nighttime, till start going. I'd be sitting at breakfast or dinner, physically present, but mentally I was checked out. Running numbers on a project, replaying a conversation with the vendor, worrying about a delivery. My hands were still, but my spirit was working overtime. And I called it resting. I would say I rest on Sunday because I stopped working. I wasn't physically doing anything, but I was still complaining internally. I was still on a treadmill. My wife told me yesterday she feels like he's a hamster on a treadmill sometimes. I said, well, that's not it's not a great feeling. And it's not faith for me to, having to feel like, man, everything is up to me. It's almost atheism, functional atheism. Because even though you have good intentions, it looks like diligence. It looks like, being a responsible business guy, a father. But underneath it is the same confession. If I don't do it, it depends on me. And that's the same thing as saying there is no God to me. I know it's extreme, okay? I know it's extreme. But when you depend on yourself, what are you saying about your relationship with God? And so what changed for me wasn't, a different technique. It was a decision. And it was a decision that I had to force myself. It was a discipline at first. And then it became a habit. And it came down to just a confession of, God, I've done what I can do. This is yours. And I want to be honest, the first few times it didn't feel like relief. It felt like risk. It felt like I was being irresponsible by letting go. And that's how deep the wiring goes. That's how deep the subconscious programming was. But every single time I've done it, to genuinely hand off something to God instead of just saying I was going to do it, the work was still there. What fell apart was my illusion that I was the one holding it up in the first place. And that's the invitation that God is extending to us. Not to stop caring or to stop working hard, but just for one day, stop pretending that you're resting and start resting. And so today's challenge, today's practice, just for today, if we're not on, a fellowship call or reaching out to someone, put the phone away. I like to put mine in the fridge. Don't talk about your problems, even work problems, whatever. Don't don't do anything. And just for 2 hours or 3 hours, just rest. Uninterrupted time with family. Go for a walk. No earbuds, no headphones. Worship. Put on some music that, read scripture. Read a book. Just sit. Just be present. And whoever's in front of you, be with that person. And I'm just going to be real. This time is going to feel harder than it sounds, especially if you're somebody who is a, father or mother, or you run a business, or both. Your mind is going to reach for that phone. It's going to try to reach for the to-do list. It's going to try to reach for activity. And that's not failure. It's just evidence of how much retraining you got to do with this muscle. It's like feeding a muscle. And when it happens, don't go into guilt mode. Just gently return. Rest is not about performance. It's about practice. And one more thing worth saying. Rest is not laziness, so do not feel lazy. God has given us this for a reason. God is not lazy. I used to think that, you could be working more. No, rest is really, it's all about trust. It takes a lot to just give it up and to just submit. So, for the rest of the day, that complaint, that worry that you're carrying, that's preventing you from resting, think about that. Let's say a quick prayer today. God, we thank you for inviting us into rest, into a day of, you created the whole day for rest. We want to come to you giving you thanks that you've given us our minds, our bodies, our souls. And you know why you made this one day a day of rest. Allow us to trust, abide in this day of rest. Even though we stop our physical bodies, let us stop our minds, our spirits, our souls today and appreciate what's in front of us. We ask for forgiveness for trying to do too much, to carry burdens that you never asked us to carry, and for allowing worrying and complaining to rob us of our peace and to steal our joy that you promised us. So today, we're making a decision to choose trust, to choose you. We release our fears, our anxieties, our frustrations. We released our unfinished work, the work that is there for tomorrow, the customers that we're supposed to call, the clients. And today we embrace rest. We enjoy the gifts of life, of family, of love that you've given us. We release our need to control every outcome. Show us what it means to rest today. Teach us how to rest. Not because everything is perfect, but because you are perfect. And may today remind us that you are God, not us. That you are in control and sovereign. And while we choose to rest, we know that you will always be working on our behalf. Show us what it means to trust. Show us what it means to love. Amen.